Lesson 6, the Consumer Price Index and inflation. That, on page 43, where we're starting, check out that cartoon at the top. I think it's kind of funny, the old people talking about their sodas. But anyway, inflation, right? Inflation is the rise of general level of prices, right? You can probably remember back when gas, well, I guess gas is not really a good example because it's gone so low lately, but milk, right? I remember going and buying a gallon of milk for $1 something, and now it's, you know, if you can get it under $3, you're ecstatic, right? Inflation. So just the basic concept that prices increase as time goes on. So here at the bottom, page 43, we have this general graph of the Consumer Price Index, and the Consumer Price Index kind of is our basis, how we can check inflation. So basically we have this basic basket of goods, and we say, okay, all the stuff in here, you know, on this date it was, you know, in 1960 it was $26, and they check those same goods every month to check the price index. Did they go up? Did they go down? What is, you know, how much did it change? So you can see the general trend of this graph from 1960 to 2013. We've had a pretty consistent rise in our CPI. Things are just continuing to get more expensive over time. And what does it mean for us? It sucks, because it means that we are paying more for the things that, you know, in the past weren't so expensive. So yeah, yes, we're making more money, but we have to in order to continue to buy things. You know, it just kind of sucks. Okay, so on page 44, which you can't, I didn't take a picture of, but look at page 44. That is the CPI. You're going to use this a lot, right? These are the numbers that we're going to use to help create our proportions. So number 3 on page 44, find and write down the annual CPI for 1998. So you'll notice that we have all the months, January through December. So on these charts, January through December, and then the last column says annual. Okay, so annual is kind of our default. If it just gives you a year, you know, in 1996, and it doesn't give you a month, then you will automatically use the annual. If it specifies a month with the year, then you will use that particular month and year for the CPI. So in number 3, it just wants the annual CPI for 1998, and that's 163.00. Make sure, don't ever round these. You want to use whatever they give you. If they give you, you know, 3 decimal places with numbers, you got to use all 3 of them. Okay, so we are into some problems. Now on page 45 is kind of a concept check, and we're not going to get too much into that into this video. We're going to get right into the math. So we are on page 46, and we're going to work through every one of these problems and talk about how we get there. And I'm going to show you kind of my process for setting these up. So in number 1, suppose a soda cost 25 cents in July of 1977. What is a comparable cost in July 2012? Okay, so this is how I always think of it. I always think of money on top, CPI on the bottom. And I'm going to have 2 proportions. In each proportion, my money goes on top, and in each proportion, my CPI goes on the bottom. And I like to say, okay, I know I'm dealing with July of 77 and July of 2012. I like to put my years, and if I have months, those also, because that helps me stay consistent. So, in July of 1977, our soda was 25 cents. And then I go back to page 44 with that chart, and I know that the CPI in July of 77 was 61. Well, do I know the cost of my soda in July of 12? No. But I know the CPI in July of 12 was 229.104. Now I have a proportion, so I can cross multiply and solve, and I will end up with 94 cents. So the soda that cost $0.25 in 1977 will cost 94 cents in July of 2012. And that is how we can use CPI in proportions. So let's look at number 2. According to College Confidential, annual salary for a college graduate in 1983. Okay, so we're talking about 1983. And again, money over CPI equals, okay, so the money in 1983 was $25,000. What would a comparable salary be? I don't know. in 2013. So notice in this one, they don't give us any months, so we are going to use the annuals. So if you go back to 1983 and check out the annual CPI, you'll see 99.6, and the annual CPI in 2013 is 56.9. Cross multiply, and oh my gosh, I looked at the wrong one. Please forgive me. In 2013, it's 232.957. And so a comparable starting salary would be $58,473.14. So while in 1983 it's like $25,000, well, man, that's not very much. Well, times have changed. 30 years later, you'd be making $58,473, and let me tell you, that is nothing to sneeze at, right? But number 3 is very similar to this. We're saying, okay, let's keep that 1983 salary, $25,000 compared to the CPI of 99.6, but let's change the year to be 1976. And it says the end of 1976. You could take that to be December or use the annual. I used the annual, and that's where I got the 56.9 from. So $25,000 job in 1983 would have been a $14,282.13 job in 1976. So you can see, I mean, from 76 to 2013, we go from 14,000 to 58,000. You know, that's huge. That is a very, very big jump in salaries. Let's look at number 4. We talk about house prices. The median value of homes in Indiana in 2011, they give me 2011, was approximately $130,000. Okay, well, let's look up the CPI for 2011. They didn't give me a month, so I use the annual, and I get 224.939. What are we comparing that to? Comparable house in 1995. So I don't know what the price would be, but I can look up the CPI, and the annual for that would be 152.4. Cross multiply, and you get $88,077.21. All right, try to finish 5 and 6 and even go on to page 47. So hit pause, see what you can do with the rest of these, and then come back and watch them, and I'll continue to work through them. So number 5, house in the burbs. So we're in 1986, and in the burbs it was worth $77.5. Well, in 1986, the CPI was 109.6. Okay, what year are we comparing to? It says August 2014. So I go and I'm going to look specifically at August 2014, and I see 237.852, cross multiply, divide, and that house is now worth $168,189.14. So, I mean, that's more than doubled. In terms of, 28 years or so. So that's very good for that homeowner. Number 6, in 1979, so I get right down my year, McDonald's hamburger cost 38 cents. So 38 cents, I'm going to go ahead and look up my CPI, and I notice it's 72.6. Again, CPI on the bottom, dollars on the top. What am I comparing that to? August 2014. So, in August 2014, I can use my same CPI from the previous problem, 237,852, and I notice that hamburger now would be $1.24, which kind of makes sense because think about the dollar menu, right? You can get a hamburger on the dollar menu, so it's pretty much staying with inflation. All right, that takes us to page 47. In 47, we're going to kind of play with our federal debt per capita a little bit. So they tell us in 2000, we've got a federal debt per capita of a really big number with a population of 281 million. Find the federal debt per capita. Okay, so remember how to find the federal debt per capita. We're going to take the federal debt and divide it by the population. And this is how I did it. So I noticed that I could take 5, 6, 7, 4, 178, and then there were 6 zeros. And I know that 6 zeros are 10 to the 6th. And when I have my 281 million, I know that million is 10 to the 6th. So notice that this eliminates these pieces. So I'm kind of taking the millions. I'm playing in millions. So when I divide that, I get 20192.8. And that is in millions. That is our federal debt per capita. Okay? Or our federal debt. Oh, crap. That is not in millions. That's our federal debt per capita. Those canceled out. They would automatically cancel out. So this is our federal debt per capita. And it says, use the CPI table to estimate what the federal debt per capita would be in 2010 with inflation. So I'm going to continue this here in number 7A. If I have a federal debt per capita of this, and this is in the year 2000. Oh, ow! There we go. 2000. And the CPI for 2000 is 172.2. And I want to compare that to 2010. Okay, so in 2010, I don't know what that would be, but I know that my CPI is 218,056. So I'm estimating that the federal debt per capita should be $25,570.04. So in 10 years, it should rise just over $5,000. Okay, well, when I look at Part B, Part B says the actual federal debt had grown to blah, 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 and the population had grown to 309 million. So in Part B, again, we're finding federal debt per capita. So I'm going to take my 13561,623, and again, times 10 to the 6th, over my population of 309 times 10 to the 6th. And again, these cancel out. I divide, and I get 43,888. So the actual, this was actual 2010. We're comparing that to our estimated. This is the estimate that we found using our 2000 data. Part C said, what does that tell you? Actual to estimate. Well, I think it's pretty clear that Part C, so you can see that in Part C, the actual federal debt per capita has grown more quickly than inflation. Because with inflation, we should only be at 25,570. However, we are really at 43,888. So we have, grown dramatically. It's kind of crazy how much that is. So that's you can kind of see that in number 7, kind of an interesting piece there. And the last question, number 8. Okay, so in number 8, they give us 2 lines. You'll see this on the bottom, page 47. Minimum wages in Indiana by year. So 1968 to 2013, with some years missing there in the beginning. So Part A, what is the ratio of the current minimum wage? And when I say current, we're going to use 2013. I know that that's not exactly current because we're in 2015, but we're going to use the data that's given. So current is 7.25 compared to the wage of 1980. And in 1980, the minimum wage was $2. And interpret that meaning. Well, you really can interpret this a lot of different ways, but what I did, I divided. I took 7.25 divided by 2, and I got 3.625. Right? So that tells me that the current minimum wage is 3.625 times more than it was in 1980. And that makes it sound pretty good, right? I mean, 3.625 times more than it was in 1980. And you could think about that a lot of different ways. But let's go to Part B. Let's use the CPI table to determine whether minimum wage has kept up with inflation. So we know what it was and what it is, but how does that track with inflation? So I'm going to start with 1980, and I'm comparing this to 2013, right? I know my years. So I'm thinking money to CPI. I know in 1980 it was $2, and I know the CPI in 1980 is 82.4. Well, we're comparing. So let's pretend we don't know in 2013, but we do know the CPI, 232.957. This is our what if scenario. So cross multiply. This tells us that the minimum wage, if it kept up with inflation, should be 5.65. This is what it should be. Well, what is it? It is $7.25. So that tells you that minimum wage has increased more quickly than inflation. If it had stayed with inflation, minimum wage would still be at 5.65, and it hasn't been that low since 2007, 2008. So we have been above inflation rate for a long time up in here. Okay, so yeah, that ends section 6.